I remember this story so vividly. It always flashes through my mind whenever I think about playing hide and seek in the dark or walking past a dim alleyway. I'll never forget that night. It was early October, just as fall began to settle in. My 3 siblings and I were visiting our mom at her small apartment. I had one sister, Jess, and 2 brothers, Mike and Eli. Our parents had divorced 2 years earlier, and since then, we rarely saw Mom. Dad wanted to make it right by letting us visit her that weekend. Mom's place was in a rough part of town, crowded buildings, broken lights, and a strange emptiness that made the streets feel lifeless. Her apartment stood beside a long, shadowy alleyway that led into the complex. You'd never find it unless you drove down that dark path yourself. She lived on the 2nd floor, and even though the area was sketchy, we always looked forward to seeing her. The place felt warm and homely, filled with soft furniture and random decorations that reminded me of Grandma's house. What made it even better were her neighbors. 2 kids lived downstairs, a boy and girl named Zach and Chi-Chi. We always played together in the parking lot near the alleyway, usually simple games like tag or kickball. But this particular night, Zach had another idea. Since Halloween was around the corner, he suggested we play hide and seek in the dark. We all agreed. My siblings joined in too, excited by the idea of playing outside after dark. The plan was to meet at 9 p.m. By then, the night had swallowed the sky, and the parking lot glowed under rusty orange streetlights. When we gathered, the air was cool, the shadows long, and the mood just eerie enough to make it fun. Like always, we picked the seeker with bubblegum in a dish. Zach ended up being it. As soon as he shouted, "Ready or not," everyone ran in different directions, vanishing behind cars, corners, and buildings. Jess and I stayed together. She was older, and I always stuck by her when things got spooky. We sprinted toward the back of the building, past the garbage bins that lined the alleyway. To get there, we had to walk deeper into the dark lane until the back wall appeared. It felt like the perfect hiding spot, quiet, far from everyone else. The game started out exciting, but after a few minutes, silence took over. The only sound was the wind brushing past the trash cans. I whispered to Jess, maybe we hid too well. She giggled softly but agreed we should probably give up soon. It was getting late. That's when we began to step out from behind the bins. And then we saw it. At the far end of the alley, under the flickering streetlight, stood a figure. My stomach dropped. It was tall, too tall, and its face was hidden in the shadows. The dim light above made it hard to see details, but one thing stood out. The person had bright, curly hair. An afro. But not just any afro, colored like a clown's wig. My heart froze. Why would anyone be dressed like that? It wasn't even Halloween yet. The figure didn't move, not even a twitch, just stood there facing us. Jess grabbed my arm and whispered, "Let's go." We backed away slowly and hurried toward the parking lot, hoping to find the others. We spotted Mike and Chi-Chi near the front of the building. Mike frowned, thinking we were still playing. But when we told him about the clown at the end of the alley, his face changed. We turned to point it out, and that's when we realized something terrifying. The clown was closer now. It had moved without a sound and was standing just a few feet further down, staring at us and waving. Its face was covered in black makeup, like it was trying to hide its features. Only its eyes were visible, and they looked human, but wrong. Before any of us could react, Chi-Chi screamed. "There's another one," she yelled, pointing behind us. We turned around. Another clown, this one taller, with green hair, was standing across the alley, motionless, staring. That was enough. We all bolted. Mike and Chi-Chi sprinted to her apartment, while Jess and I dashed upstairs to ours. Inside, Eli was already talking to Mom. She hugged us tightly, asking if we were okay. Eli explained that he had seen something too. He'd been hiding in the courtyard, crouched behind a bush, when he heard footsteps. Thinking it was Zach, he stayed still. But then Zach called from the other side of the complex, meaning whoever was standing near him wasn't Zach at all. When he turned to look, a clown was looming over him. Eli ran as fast as he could to tell Zach's parents, who locked their door immediately. Later that night, after everyone had fallen asleep, I woke up thirsty. I went to grab a drink from the fridge when I heard a faint tapping noise. It came from the window beside the kitchen. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer and lifted the blinds. My heart nearly stopped. The same clown from earlier was staring in at me from the 2nd floor. I screamed, waking my mom. She rushed out, but when I showed her the window, the clown was gone, vanished into the night. She believed me, though. To this day, I can't stand playing hide and seek in the dark or walking near an alleyway. Every time I hear a tap on glass, I remember that painted face smiling back at me under the flickering light. The story I'm about to share happened when I was 11 years old, back in 6th grade. My school sat directly across from a beat-up, rotting house that always gave me chills. The paint was peeling, the roof was sagging, and the windows were covered in grime so thick you could barely see through them. I never understood how anyone could live there, or why they'd want to. Every day after school, my friends and I would pass by it, and they'd always joke about ghosts living inside. I told them to stop because I was sure the owner wouldn't be happy about kids making fun of their home. Of course, they teased me for being scared. And honestly, they weren't wrong. I was a total scaredy cat back then, always anxious about how adults might react. But once October rolled in, everything changed. My friends started staying after school for their programs, which meant I was walking home alone. That's when things started getting unsettling. It was the second week of October, the first time in a while I had to walk home alone. The air was cold and still, and as I passed that creepy house, I noticed something strange. In one of the upstairs windows, there was a figure standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. I froze for a second before hurrying past. I told myself it was just my imagination. But the next day, it happened again, and the day after that. Each time I walked by, that same shadowy figure stood there, watching. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but I could feel their eyes following me. When I told my friends, they laughed it off, saying it was probably someone messing with me for Halloween. I tried to believe them, but deep down, I knew something was off. Then, a week before Halloween, I saw the same figure again, but this time, not in the window. It was standing on the front porch. As I passed the house, my heart started racing. I kept my head down, pretending not to notice, but then, out of nowhere, the figure charged down the steps and started running toward me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could, but whoever it was moved faster. I could hear their heavy footsteps right behind me and their voice shouting something I couldn't understand. It didn't sound human. It sounded broken, almost like gibberish. I darted into a nearby alley and ducked behind a dumpster, the stench almost unbearable. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would give me away. The man's footsteps stopped at the alley entrance. I could hear him mumbling, pacing, breathing heavily, so close I could feel it. I clamped my hands over my mouth, praying he wouldn't look behind the dumpster. Then suddenly, silence. A moment later, his footsteps faded. He ran off. I waited a minute, maybe longer, before bolting home without looking back once. When I got home, I burst through the door, crying and shaking. My dad called the police right away. They showed up within 20 minutes and asked me everything. What happened, what the man looked like, and which house he came from. They promised to investigate and said they'd update us the next day. When the officers came back, they told us something that didn't make sense. No one lived in that house. It had been abandoned for years. They said it was probably a squatter or a homeless man hiding inside. But the idea that someone, or something, had been watching me for weeks made my skin crawl. My friends didn't believe me until they saw the police cars parked outside that creepy place. Even now, more than 10 years later, I still get uneasy walking past old houses. I'm 22 now, but every time I see cracked windows and peeling paint, I remember that man, standing in the window, watching me walk home. I grew up in a small rural village in Poland, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and silence takes over once the sun goes down. My country is still very Christian, so Halloween has never been widely celebrated. Many older folks here see it as something satanic, an unholy celebration that should be ignored. Still, in recent years, some people began putting small pumpkins on their porches. A few even carved them into jack-o'-lanterns, though that sight in the countryside always felt oddly out of place. Around that time, I had a habit of walking my dog Susie every night. She was big and stubborn, and walking her during the day was nearly impossible. She hated children and cyclists, barking furiously whenever one passed. That's why I preferred our night walks. By 8 p.m., it already looked like the middle of the night. The streets were empty, the air was cold, and the crunching leaves underfoot gave me that peaceful autumn feeling I loved. There's a small road I always took, It ran from the little supermarket near my house all the way to an old church. That road was short, maybe a 10-minute walk, with the forest on one side and a large horse stable on the other. At night, it was completely deserted, and the old lamps there barely worked. I liked the solitude, though. It helped me clear my head. That evening, as I neared the end of the path, Susie suddenly began to bark uncontrollably. I nearly jumped out of my skin. She wasn't just barking. She was growling, pulling at her leash like something had driven her mad. I looked around, expecting to see another dog, or maybe a bike passing by. But there was nothing. Then I realized she was staring at something, or someone, near the old stable. I followed her gaze toward the trees, and that's when I saw it. Behind the priest's abandoned stable, maybe 15 meters away, stood the silhouette of a man. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, the figure was real. He was kneeling with his back straight, wearing something that shimmered white in the moonlight. A robe, maybe? At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a bush, or maybe a scarecrow. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became. It was a person. My heart started to race. The man wasn't hiding, yet he wasn't moving either. He just knelt there, completely still, facing in my direction. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Susie was practically choking herself trying to pull away. I yanked her leash, but she resisted, barking at the darkness. I whispered sharply, "Let's go," grabbed her harness, and started walking fast, not running, just fast enough to seem calm. The church wasn't far, maybe a minute's walk. I could already see a few people standing outside under the lights. I considered telling them what I saw, but what would I even say? That there was a man kneeling in the shadows, staring at me? It sounded ridiculous. So I just kept walking, pretending everything was fine, but inside, my chest felt tight. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder to make sure no one was following. Eventually, I reached home safely, though my nerves were shot. Even Susie, normally curious and energetic, just went straight to her bed. That night, I woke up to the sound of sirens. They were loud and constant, echoing through the village for at least half an hour. The next morning, the news spread quickly. The priest's old stable had burned down overnight. Most people assumed some drunk teenagers had started the fire as a prank, but I knew better. The person I saw wasn't laughing or fooling around. He had looked disturbingly calm, almost like he was waiting for something. I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Between the time I saw him and the fire, at least 5 or 6 hours had passed. Was he still there the whole time? Just kneeling in the dark, waiting? Even now, I get chills remembering that night. Maybe it was just a squatter. Maybe not. But I'll never forget that eerie white shape in the moonlight, and the way Susie seemed to sense something I couldn't. Whatever he was, I'm just grateful he never followed us. Last October, my friends and I decided to visit a pumpkin patch after school. The air was cold and crisp, the sky pale gray, and the wind carried that sweet autumn scent of leaves and baked goods. The patch wasn't huge, but it was alive with people. Families walking hand in hand, kids chasing each other through rows of orange pumpkins, and laughter echoing across the fields. We parked near the entrance and grabbed a small wagon to haul our pumpkins. Every row was lined with pumpkins of all sizes, from tiny decorative ones to huge, misshapen giants. I could already imagine carving mine later that night. Everything felt normal, calm, festive, almost perfect. But then my friend Kevin, always the one to make things interesting, grinned and said, "Bet you won't grab the biggest pumpkin all the way in the back." I followed his pointing finger toward a patch near the woods, the trees thick and dark behind it. I laughed, pretending to be fearless. "Fine," I said, "I'll get it." We started walking. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The chatter and laughter from the main area faded until all we could hear was the crunch of leaves beneath our shoes and the faint whistle of wind through the trees. The path narrowed the further we went. The trees grew thicker, leaning toward us like watching giants. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the late afternoon sun flickered through the branches. Even the air felt heavier here, colder. When we finally reached the far end of the patch, I froze. Behind the last row of pumpkins, near the tree line, stood something. A figure. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow. It stood perfectly still, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and old-looking clothes. Its arms were out, like it had been hung there. But the longer I stared, the less sure I became. It was too thin, Too human. Do you see that? I whispered. Kevin turned, squinting. Probably just a decoration, he said casually. But I couldn't shake the unease building in my chest. The hat moved slightly, not from the wind, but like someone breathing under it. My hands tightened on the pumpkin I'd picked. I turned away, trying to act normal. Let's go, I said quickly. We started walking back, toward the main area, wagon creaking behind us. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The figure hadn't moved, or maybe it had. Every time I looked, it seemed closer. Kevin noticed me looking back and laughed. You're freaking yourself out, dude. Stop staring. But I couldn't. The way that thing just stood there, silent, still, but somehow alive, made my skin crawl. By the time we reached the edge of the main field, I dared one last look. The figure was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe it was a decoration. Maybe I'd just imagined movement. I told myself to relax. We walked toward the small stand that sold cider and cookies, the smell of cinnamon and apples filling the air. The sun had nearly disappeared, and the patch was bathed in a dull, orange glow. Then came the sound, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping. I stopped dead. Did you hear that? I asked. Kevin shook his head. Probably an animal. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was there again, only 10 feet behind us this time. It wasn't standing with its arms out anymore. It was upright. Still. Watching. Kevin saw my face and went pale. What is that? He whispered. Before I could answer, the figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate, like it was studying us. Then, without moving its legs, it began to glide forward, silent, smooth, unnatural. Panic hit me hard. I grabbed Kevin's arm and ran. The wagon bounced behind us, pumpkins rolling and tumbling as we sprinted toward the crowd. I could hear the leaves crunching behind us, too fast, too steady to be just footsteps. When we reached the main area, everything looked normal again. Families were still laughing, kids still running. But when I turned back, the figure had stopped, standing at the edge of the pumpkin rows, motionless, just watching. We paid for our pumpkins with shaking hands and practically dove into the car. I didn't look back until we were miles away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, that shape standing among the trees, that slow, gliding movement that didn't belong to anything human. A few days later, I read online that someone else had reported seeing a strange figure near the same wooded area of the pumpkin patch. They described it exactly as I'd seen it, silent, motionless, too thin, and somehow wrong. I haven't been back there since. But every October, when the air turns cold and the leaves start to fall, I think about that day. I can still picture it. The hat, the stillness, the way it seemed to float through the leaves. And sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run.